The order came just after sunset, carried by a voice so measured it barely rose above the sound of cicadas. Remove your uniforms. The words hung in the humid air of Singapore's harbour like mist that refused to lift. 300 British men, soldiers, engineers, and telegraph operators, stood motionless in the fading light. They had surrendered weeks ago after the fortress fell. Their khaki tunics, once symbols of the crown, were now stiff with mud and blood. None of them spoke. They had heard stories about Japanese brutality, about what happened to prisoners who showed weakness. Now every rumor felt like prophecy coming true. The wind carried the smell of rubber smoke, diesel, and decay. Somewhere beyond the wire, a generator coughed and made every spine stiffen. In that instant, the silence became suffocating. One of the guards repeated the command, not louder, but with a precision that suggested ritual. Remove your uniforms. The men's faces did not change, but their eyes told the story, disbelief turning into dread. Thomas, a signalman from Manchester, gripped the edge of his torn shirt. His hands trembled so violently he had to ball them into fists. Around him, the other prisoners stared at the packed earth, waiting for someone else to move first. No one did. He remembered what his sergeant had said before the white flag went up, "They'll make examples of us." Those words had once felt like steel. Now they were a chain he could not shake. The sun had dropped behind the warehouse roofs, but its reflection shimmered on the water like molten copper. The guards stood still, their boots planted in the gravel, rifles slung but ready. Thomas's heartbeat thudded against his ribs. Every sound became magnified, the creak of leather, the distant dogs, the hum of an aircraft overhead. Fear, he realized, had its own texture. Then, through the stillness, a second voice broke the spell. It was softer, feminine, almost careful. You will be inspected for disease and parasites. Medical necessity. No harm will come to you. The words sounded impossible. Compassion didn't exist here. The men exchanged looks of confusion that bordered on panic. They had been trained to believe the Japanese were savages without conscience. And yet, here was a voice explaining itself, almost seeking permission. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Dust settled on their boots. Sweat pooled in collarbones. Then Thomas took one step forward. He unbuttoned the first clasp of his tunic with hands that wouldn't obey. The fabric clung to his skin. Another man followed, then another, until the sound of cloth shifting replaced the insects. None of the guards moved. They simply waited. One of them, a lieutenant with calloused hands, turned her gaze toward the harbor and swallowed hard. In that brief gesture, Thomas saw not cruelty, but uncertainty. It startled him more than any bayonet could have. The fear didn't vanish, but something shifted, a crack opening in the wall of hatred that war had built. When the first tunic hit the ground, the sound was soft, almost gentle. A crow called overhead. Somewhere a kettle whistled from a field station. The world continued as if this moment were too small to notice. But for those men, time had stopped. They were no longer soldiers or prisoners, only humans, waiting to learn what kind of order their captors believed in. And when one of the guards stepped forward, not with rope, not with a weapon, but with a folded cotton towel, the meaning of that silence changed forever. No one moved at first. The towel in the guard's hand seemed heavier than any rifle, a white flag offered to people who didn't know if they were supposed to accept it. The men stared at it as if it might catch fire. The evening air was thick enough to taste, salt, oil, sweat, and beneath it all something metallic, the scent of fear itself. Thomas could feel his pulse in his throat. His fingers twitched, wanting to reach for the towel, yet afraid of what it meant. The Japanese lieutenant shifted her weight, boots scraping against the gravel. She spoke again, her voice low and precise, the kind of tone used to prevent chaos. Step forward one at a time. Take the towel. Proceed to the inspection tent. Not every man understood the words, but the gestures were clear enough. She pointed to a row of canvas tents behind the dock, steam rising from iron kettles. The men hesitated. A few tried to whisper, but the sound died before it reached their lips. Then Thomas moved. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe curiosity, maybe the simple need to know what waited beyond the fear. He stepped forward, eyes locked on the woman's hands. She didn't meet his gaze. She simply held out the towel, palms open as if presenting an offering. The cotton was rough but clean. It smelled faintly of lye and steam. He took it. For the first time in weeks, something unstained touched his skin. Behind him, another man followed, then another. The sound of footsteps replaced the hum of insects. The line began to move. The guards stood apart, forming a corridor but not closing it. There were no shouts, no blows, no threats, only the steady rhythm of breathing, the shuffle of bare feet, and the distant hiss of boiling water. Inside the tent, the light changed. Evening sun filtered through canvas, turning the air amber. Thomas blinked. He expected interrogation. Maybe a camera, maybe cold water thrown like a curse. Instead, there were tables lined with metal basins, brushes, and bottles marked with red circles, the symbol of the Japanese Medical Corps. The smell of disinfectant filled his nose, sharp and clean, a smell he hadn't known since before the siege. A Japanese medic stood at the far end, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back under a white cap. She looked too young to be part of this war. Her eyes flicked over the prisoners, but never lingered. She didn't look at them as enemies. She looked at them as work to complete. She spoke quietly to an orderly who handed her a clipboard. They worked with the detached focus of people who'd done this 100 times. Thomas watched as the first man stepped up to the basin. The medic dipped a cloth into the water and began washing the prisoner's arms, methodically, efficiently, without a word. Steam rose from the basin. The man flinched but didn't resist. When the medic handed him a clean towel, their eyes met for half a second. Something passed between them, an understanding neither could name. Thomas's turn came next. He stood before the basin, holding his towel tight against his chest. The medic nodded once, gesturing for him to lower it. The water was warm, not scalding. As the cloth touched his skin, Thomas felt his body react, not in fear, but in confusion. The motion was so deliberate, so careful, that it felt almost like respect. No one had touched him like that since the war began. Outside, voices murmured in Japanese, a language that sounded both foreign and strangely calm. Every sound inside the tent became intimate, the drip of water, the scrape of metal, the soft exhale of breath. No one cried, no one spoke. The silence itself became sacred. When the inspection was over, the medic stepped aside and motioned toward a pile of folded garments. "Clean clothing," she said in halting English. The words reached Thomas's ears like music from another world. He reached for one, fingers brushing the fabric, gray cotton, pressed, still warm from the sun. On the chest, in white kanji, was a single mark. Thomas didn't yet know what it meant, but as he clutched the uniform, he realized that the terror that had gripped him since surrender was beginning to dissolve. Not because he trusted these people, but because for the first time since the fall of Singapore, the world around him followed rules again. Not cruelty, not chaos, procedure. Outside, the line continued to move through the tents, the same rhythm repeating: disinfection, towel, clothing. The dock shimmered in the twilight. A place once meant for cargo now transformed into a clinic. And though no one said it out loud, every prisoner felt the same quiet disbelief, that the first act of order they would experience from their captors would come not from pity, but from discipline. That night, Thomas would remember how the towel felt in his hands, rough and clean, heavier than fear. He would not sleep easily, but for the first time, his dreams would not smell of gunpowder. They would smell of soap.